I'm going to talk now about making a jewelry box, a fairly simple jewelry box. This is a jewelry box that just consists of a box with a shaped top, and it has a tray in it that provides you with two levels of things to store. You could make a dual tray, and one side, for example, could be little compartments for rings. The other side could be for other types of jewelry. But for this tutorial, I'm just going to talk about making just this one shelf. This particular one is made out of olive wood. The one, I'm going to use some different wood in the tutorial, but I just wanted to show a couple of things, see if I can move this a little closer. The grain pattern figure goes around the corners. So I'm going to do that in the tutorial here and just use a different kind of wood. It uses hinges that hold the top up at about 90 degrees, and of course I'll show how to set those hinges. This is the wood I'm going to use for making the box. The story behind this wood is that this was given to me by a friend. He actually had some furniture that had been made overseas somewhere, maybe in Indonesia, and he didn't want the furniture anymore. He took it apart, and this was, I think, a shelf or something. Now the problem is that this piece of wood was warped in this direction pretty badly, so I had to cut it in half in order to prepare the wood, get it fairly flat. That's okay in one thing because the box itself is only about 4 inches high, so I'm going to use this half here, this part down there, for the sides of the box, and then I'm going to use the section right about here. I'm going to use for the top, and I'm going to have to glue that back together again. The box itself is 8 inches, approximately 8 inches by 12 inches. You can make your box just about any shape, size that you want, but 8 by 12 seems to give a nice looking box. Now I like to use fairly decorative wood when I'm making a box. You look at this, there's a lot of figure in the wood, and I like using that. It seems to show up, I think, on the box pretty well. You can, of course, just use something simple. You could use a walnut, a plain walnut or something, and that would look very nice also. But I think choosing wood that has defects and a lot of figure in it is much more interesting in the long run. When you have wood that has a lot of problems, defects, splits, things like this, it's more challenging. You have to deal with those, fill those, glue them back together, and a number of things. But as you saw with the olive wood box, it makes a fairly interesting box. So next we'll talk about laying it out here. All right, this is the part I'm going to use for the top of the box. I'll match up the grain and I'll glue that back together. And the glue line won't show to any great degree here. Of course, you can always see it, but it won't be really obvious. And then I will use the wood on this board in that direction for the sides of the box. I need to have wood for the bottom of the box and for the bottom of the tray, and of course the sides of the tray, and I'll have to cut that from some of the other wood that I have here. That is much thinner. It's only about 3/16, whereas the sides of the box are about 1/2 inch. The top needs to be, I'd say, at least 3/8 thick. Although you probably can get away with a little less than that, since we're going to do a bevel on the top. Going too small doesn't give you much room to do the bevel. So I'd say 3/8 to 1/2 is really a good thickness for the top. Okay, I've cut and glued the two pieces of wood together for the top. Excuse me. I'll do it this way. You can see that I have about 13.5 inches in length there, which is longer than the 12 inches that I need. But I certainly don't want to go for just 12 inches because when you go to glue something on, it can slip around a little bit. And then width, I'm around 9 inches wide. Also, there's a little bit of a defect right here, a little bit of a crack. And I'll have to work that. What I usually do is fill those with epoxy. And I either use plain epoxy or epoxy mixed with a black dye to make it come out a little better. Now in matching it, what I did was I matched this part of the figure right here, and then there's a little figure running through here that I matched also, and then the rest of it's pretty nondescript, so it looks pretty good. But if you look closely, you really can't see the joint. It's pretty invisible, and I think this will look pretty good on the top of the box when we go ahead and put it on. When I set this on the box, I'm going to be setting it pretty much on this side so that I capture the end here. So you can almost think about it's going to be 12 inches to about there. So this will be centered on the top of the box from about here to maybe about there. Okay, now I'm going, let me just talk for a second about the wood. You may wonder, what kind of wood is this? To be honest, I don't know, but it brings up a woodworking joke, and that is, when you ask a woodworker, what's the best kind of wood? There's a standard answer they give, and that is free wood. So this was free wood given to me by someone else, so we're going to go ahead and use it. I'm going to cut this now to about 4 inches wide. Just a slight bit over 4 inches to give me enough room to trim if I need to trim anything. I did run this edge on my jointer, so I have a straight flat edge here that I'm using. So now that I have my piece, and I know that I want to use this side to the outside. Yeah. Okay. What I really like is to put a really nice figure in the front of the box. But I'm kind of boxed in here, kind of stuck, because when we cut the wood, we're going to flow the grain around the corners. And that means that I'm going to have one corner that's a mismatch, because as I wrap the wood around the box, when I get to the final corner, it's not going to match. And I want that corner to be in the back, which means that I have to have an 8-inch section before I get to the front. So this is really the most attractive part of the wood right here, and I prefer, if I could, I'd like to have that right in the front of the box, but I can't do it because of the way it works. So what I'm going to do, I have about an 8-inch piece here, okay, and then I'll have 12 inches here. So this will become the front of the box. Really not too bad. It'd been nicer if I could have gotten all of it, but you will be able to see this coming around the corner. And then I'll have another 8-inch section on the other side, which is about there. And then this 12-inch section here, whoops, I'll slide that over so you can see it. But anyway, this 12-inch section here will be the back. So the back can be pretty nondescript because people really aren't going to look at the back to any great degree. So that's how we're going to cut it, 8, 12, 8, 12. All right, so what we have here is we set the saw up to a 45-degree angle. We have the miter gauge, and I have set the miter gauge so that it will cut square. And I'm now going to make a cut. Actually, I already made one, but I'm going to demonstrate the cutting of it here. And what's important is that your cut be straight across. Okay, so I need to trim this just a tiny bit. Okay, and that's close enough. You can see very barely see any light through here, so I'm satisfied that I have a square cut across. All right, so what I've done now is mark this at 8 inches, and I'm going to now cut this with bevel to the inside. This is a difficult cut because I don't have a lot to hold on to here, so I'm going to have to be careful about making my cut here. So I'm 8 inches, and I'm satisfied with that. Now what I need to do is cut the bevel on the remaining piece of wood because I want the same side out all the time. So I can't use this bevel because I would be flipping the wood over. I now have to make a cut to invert that bevel. So here would be the piece of wood, the way it will look on the corner. You can see that the grain flows around the corner. I marked these with a number just so that I know which way they go back together. It won't be quite as confusing as trying to figure it out just from putting the, trying to follow the grain, in other words, for the corners. So now I'm going to cut a 12-inch piece. All right, here we're going to cut the 12-inch piece, and the wood's getting a little shorter, makes it easier to deal with. And that's 12 inches, and I'm satisfied with that. So I marked this one as number 2, And I'm going to invert the bevel on this one just like we did before. And I'm going to next have to cut an 8-inch piece. So I'm going to use the previous 8-inch piece to mark it, because what's important is not that it be exactly 8 inches, but that it be exactly the same length as the previous side. By putting them together to see if they are the same length. And the piece I just cut is just a little bit long, so I'm going to go and trim that just a tiny bit. Close enough. So now I'm going to do the next 12-inch piece. Oops, oh, I have to invert it as usual. Now I'll do the 12-inch piece just like I did the 8-inch piece. And those are pretty much the same length, so I now have the 4 pieces that I need for the sides. Okay, I'll try to do this handheld. That's the box. We have the 4 sides there, and you can see how the grain flows around that corner. And a little harder to see here because of the lighting, but the grain flows around that corner. And finally, the last corner, the grain flows around there. The other corner is not a match. Now, so far I have made 2 panels that are 3/16 of an inch thick. One of these will wind up as the bottom of the box, and the other one will wind up as the bottom of the tray. I really haven't decided which one I'll use for which yet, but they're both about the same size here. I have a couple of other things that I need to do. One, I have to have supports for the tray. Those are 5/8 inch long and 1/4 thick. Of course, they have to be about 11 inches long. So I'm going to cut a couple of pieces right now, and then this is more than 1/4 of an inch thick. It's almost 1/2 an inch thick. But I'll run them through the sander and get them down to 1/4 of an inch. Okay, I had to go open the blast gate here. Now I can do the cutting. Okay, I did 3 here just in case I screw up. I have 1 extra. I'll take it over to my sander now and bring these down to 1/4 of an inch. I won't show this on video. So now I have these 3 pieces, and they have been taken down to about 1/4 of an inch, maybe a little bit less than 1/4 of an inch. I kind of went on what I thought looked good. The other thing that I need is the sides for the tray and the center piece for the tray. I use sides of 1 inch, and then the center is 1.25 inches. So right now I'm going to cut some pieces for the sides. I have 1 inch set up on here, and this piece of wood is the part of the board that we used before that had a lot of defects in it. I filled the defects with epoxy, and I'm going to try to use this. So I'm going to cut some 1 inch strips. I think the first one I'll cut will be the 1 1/4, however. And the reason I'll cut the first one is that I want a good piece here for that center. Now I'm going to go back to 1 inch. And I'm going to cut 4 pieces. And I cut a few extras there just in case those defects in one of the pieces or 2 of the pieces are unusable. Hopefully I'll be able to get 4 good ones out of here. So now I have my pieces for the supports, for the tray support, and for the sides. Extra pieces for the sides and extra pieces for the tray support. And I'm going to round over 1 edge on each one. I have the router set up here. This is a 1/8 inch round over bit. I have a fence, and I have set up the fence so that the bearing on the router bit is exactly even with the fence. You do need the fence to do this because of the thinness of the boards. I won't go into a long explanation, but if you want to find out, try routing without a fence on the 3/8 inch piece, and when you flip it over, the round over isn't equal on both sides. Okay, so what I've done here is I've put the pieces in position in the way that I want the edge routed. So I have the top is the part that I want routed, and I have this lane here. So we're going to go ahead and route these. Gives me a rounded over edge. This comes out pretty nicely. And that's the stock preparation. I can't round over the 1 1/4 inch piece for the tray yet, and I'll explain why as we get to building the tray. But anyway, we do now have all of the stock preparation done, and we can start to put the box together here. Now I'm ready to cut the rabbet for the groove for the bottom in the sides. And I've done a couple of things. One, I've decided which piece I'm going to use for the bottom, and just for my own use I've marked it so that I know it's going to go like this downward. The other thing is that I've marked each piece of wood with indicating up. So that means that I have to use this side as a reference side, and I'm going to cut 1/4 off of the bottom and about 1/4 deep. Now what you want to do is get a piece of scrap, and you want to make your initial cuts in scrap to check everything, because you certainly don't want to do your setup on your actual wood here. But I'll also show you why that's important for fitting the bottom. I'm going to go ahead and make a cut on here. So I don't need to cut a lot, but I can check that I'm 1/4 inch approximately from the bottom, and I'm about 1/4 inch deep there. Okay. So I put this aside because I'm going to use this again, and I'm going to run each of these sides here and make the initial cut. Okay, I had to stop here for a minute because I forgot to open the blast gate, so I went and opened the blast gate. Now what I'm going to do is use this piece of scrap, and I'm going to adjust the blade so that I can fit this bottom into the groove. And of course I'm gonna move the fence away. And there I have a fit. It's maybe a little bit on the loose side, so I'm going to move this just a little bit tighter. Okay. And then I'll make my cuts on the actual pieces here. Okay, I'm very satisfied with that. Yep. All right, I'm gonna try to do this as a close-up. In fitting the bottom, I want to fit it to the ends of the grooves. So here's one end, I lay the piece in here, and then when I bring it to the other side, I'm going to mark my cut right there at the end of the groove. I'm going to go cut this. Okay, here's the cut for this length. Here's one side, and here's the other side. You definitely do not want this too long, because if you allow this to be too long, when you go to put it together, it won't go together. Now we're going to have to cut it on the other dimension on the sides, and the tricky thing here is that I want the where I glued it together, I want that in the center of the side, so we're going to have to do a little special stuff here. So what I did for the center, let me back this off just a little bit here. Okay. I marked the center of the side, and I've lined that up with the glue mark. So now I can mark the two sides here, this one and this one. And I'll take this to the table saw and cut this on the table saw. I'm not going to show you that because it gets too much video. Okay, and there's the cut for the sides on each side. If anything, you want the sides to be a little bit short because this bottom piece can expand and contract, and you want to leave a little bit of room for that expansion and contraction. Let's go ahead and put this together. Okay, and there's the box with the grain flowing around the corners. Okay. Now we have to figure out where to put this support for the shelf. So I'm going to do a little bit of calculation here. First thing is that I want to leave 3/4 of an inch for the top. I'm going to cut this thing after I put it all together, and I'm going to leave 3/4 for the top. Let's see if I can get one that's a little easier to read here. All right, we'll try that. And then when I cut it, I'm going to lose about 1/8 of an inch. Okay. Now my sides are 1 inch, but I want them to stick above the box, the opening of the box. So I'm going to take it down 3/4 of an inch. But then I have a bottom that is 3/16. So I'm going to figure 1, 2, 3/16 there. So I want my support to be right there. Now I'm going to adjust the table saw, and I'm going to cut 1/4 of an inch, that area right there, and this is 2 1/8 inch. So from there to the bottom is 2 1/8 inch. So when I set my saw, I'm going to use the bottom as the reference surface, and I'm going to take the outside of the saw 2 1/8 inches from the bottom. And then what I'll do is make the cuts going in until I get a good fit with this support here. So I have my saw set up for about 1/4 of an inch cut, and I'm going to use a piece of scrap to do a test to see how deep it is and see if I'm set up properly. I am going to, you can see that, I don't know if you can see there, but it's 2 1/8 to the outside of the blade, not to the inside. So the first thing I'll check is the depth. That's 1/4 of an inch, that's fine. The next thing is I want to be 2 1/8 to the outside of that cut. I'm just a little bit short, but I'm going to let that go. Pretty close. Okay, so now I'm going to cut these pieces. These are the front and back sides. Now one thing you want to be careful about is that you orient these things properly. You want to use the bottom as your reference surface when you're making your cut. And you only want to do these 2. You don't want to do the other 2, because these supports are only going to go on the long sides here. Now I move my fence in towards the blades, and I make my next cut on the scrap. And I'll check that, and I'll still do not quite pretty close. good tight fit. I need to cut the other one, of course. Now I can cut these pieces to length, and these only go to the to this part of the groove. You don't go down here, you go to here. And you might even want to leave a little bit of extra space there, because when you go to put these things together, if that's sticking out too much, it's not going to come together. So, not that these two go together, but alright, so I'm going to mark this one right there, and I'm going to go cut that on camera. So here's my two pieces cut and fitted. They fit right to the edge with a little bit of extra there, a little shorter, just to make sure that I don't have any problems when I go to put them together. My next step is that I'm going to cut a groove in the end of each of these to put an FF biscuit, so that when I put these pieces together, I'll have, in essence, a spline, the spline being the FF biscuit, between these to give them a little bit more strength. You can possibly get along without that. You can glue these things up just directly with glue to the miters, but it is not quite as strong, and when you go to glue it, you have a little bit more trouble getting everything aligned. Putting these biscuits in gives you sort of a self-alignment, makes it easier to get everything glued up. I'm going to go set up for cutting this, and then I'll talk about how it's done. Okay, here's my setup for cutting the slots in the sides. I have a 5 30-second slot cutter here. And 5 30-seconds just happens to be the same size as the FF biscuits, the thickness of the FF biscuits. And I have a ramp here, 45 degrees. And the goal is to present the cut, the miter cut, at a 90-degree angle to the cutter. If you make one yourself, remember that the way the cutter is spinning, it's going to push things in this direction, so everything has to be braced from this side. Your ramp has to have a stop here, and then you have to have a stop for the jig itself. It takes a little bit to set this up, and when you do, one question, of course, is where to cut the slot. You can't cut too low, because if you cut too low, you'll cut right through the wood, and it'll come out, it'll show on the other side, which will destroy your piece. But if you cut a little bit higher, everything will be okay. I'm going to go ahead and make a cut here. And incidentally, this is a piece of scrap that is the same width and thickness as the sides. In fact, it's a cutoff from when I did the sides. So I know that what I'm testing here is exactly what I'm going to be cutting on the real ones. And there's my slot that I've cut here for the sides. Let me gather the sides together and then we'll cut. Okay, I forgot to mention that when you cut the groove, you want to center it on the side. And the reason to center it is because I'm going to cut two sides, and if I'm offset one way, when I cut the other side, I'm going to be offset the other way, and then they're not going to fit together. So if you need to offset them, then you're going to have to do two setups, so that when you turn the board around to do the other side, that it's offset in the right direction. But what I did here was just to center the cut, and I do have enough space up here that when I cut the top off, I'm not going to cut into the biscuit here. So let me go ahead and make these cuts. And also, when you make your cut, make sure that when you pull it out, you pull the whole jig out. Okay, you don't want to reach down and pull this up, because when you do that, it's going to screw up your wood. One thing I forgot to mention, of course, is how deep you make the cut. And you want to make it about half the depth or half the width of your biscuit. You want to make sure, one thing you can do to test it is after you make your cuts, you can put the two sides together and make sure that they fit together and that they are not holding the two pieces apart, that the biscuit is not holding the two pieces apart. So this one is fine. Okay, offline I have sanded all of the pieces. I sanded them down to 220 grit, and then I wet the wood, let it dry, and sand it again. And then I also buffed it a little bit, which you may or may not have the capability of doing, but it makes for a nice smooth surface. So what I'm going to do now is, oh, and then I put shellac on the wood. So because this is going to be the inside, and it's going to be pretty tough to put a finish on the inside after everything is assembled. It's much easier to do it before. I'm going to put these pieces in that are the supports for the shelf. And I haven't put any finish on these because I don't want to get finish where they would have to glue. They don't require a lot of support. So I'm not going to put a lot of glue in here. And the other thing that's very, very critical is that when you put these in, that they not extend past the edge of the cut. Because if they do, you're not going to be able to put the box together properly. And then I just put a couple of clamps on it like this, and then let them sit. When they finish, I'll put a final sanding and finish on the support piece. Okay, so now we'll just let them sit for a bit, and when we come back we'll be ready to assemble. After we put finish on these things, we'll be ready to assemble a box.